Hi, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Dimos Gergokitsos. You might know me from the other webinars or the Airlock Academy. And here with me is Dr. Martin Burkhardt. He's the product manager of the Airlock Microgateway and the Airlock Gateway. I'm going to present to you today the Airlock Microgateway, which has been released the first time, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago. And we are going to see an example how it's set up and what you can do with it. As you know for surely since you're here, the trends have been moving away from the monolithic heavyweight infrastructure components towards the microservices, microsegmentation, zero trust architectures. There has been a move to agile software development, which helps with DevOps or the DevSecOps paradigm. So in order to achieve this, people are using container platforms so they can start up a service and pull it down accordingly to the needs they have. Usually an agile team then has a responsibility for a microservice or a service life cycle from start to the end. So it means it's starting from the development until the deployment. And what's recommended that you integrate the security from day one. So it makes sense to give them the security components to the development environment so they can develop against those security components. Before we move on to the Microgateway itself, I would like to explain one or two things about the renaming we did. As you might have seen, we renamed the component called Airlock WAF to Airlock Gateway. And the second component, the Airlock Identity and Access Management, the IAM, still has its name. The reason being is that the features provided by the Airlock Gateway are, or the functionalities provided by the Airlock Gateway differ from the functionalities a typical web application firewall has. So with time, the web application firewall, the so-called, now called Airlock Gateway, had more and more functionalities which are typical for an API gateway, which weren't inside the typical core of the web application firewall. And therefore, to be able to distinguish between the web application firewall product and the component Airlock Gateway, we renamed the Airlock Gateway to the new name. Now, as you might know, we have already a Docker image on Docker Hub for the Airlock IAM, the Identity and Access Management, since I think 2 versions ago. And the missing link there was the Airlock Gateway. So we needed to do something to be able to have an Airlock Gateway in a Docker container. And what we did is, if you have a look at the appliance, there are a lot of components. There is the Apache taking the requests, the filter engine working those requests, applying the deny rules, allow rules. Underneath there's a reporting, we have a configuration center, a REST API, we have an additional Tomcat to deploy even more web applications, and underneath, of course, the OS and the networking are also part of the appliance. And all of this would be too much inside a container. Containers should be as few things as possible. And what we did is we extracted the Apache and the filter engine and put them into the Microgateway. This thing can be deployed as a container. This Microgateway can be deployed as a container, typically inside Docker. And of course, you can use Kubernetes and OpenShift to orchestrate those containers. What we did is focus on security. So you can work with the deny rules. You can use the Open API specification. So if you have an Open API specification of the service behind the microgateway, you can upload it to the microgateway and then apply it to requests and responses. And of course, we left a JOT validation in there and processing. I'm going to explain on the next slide what the reasoning behind this one is. And the configuration of this thing will be through DSL. We're going to have a look at the configuration in 2 or 3 slides. As you can see, not everything from the appliance went into the microgateway. And what we have now is sometimes people would like to have still the features of the appliance, but use the microgateway as a filtering service in front of their own service. And the typical setup for this thing is to have an Airlock gateway in the front, which does things like policy entry point. So if an unknown customer arrives, the Airlock gateway will redirect the request to the Airlock IAM, which will verify the user, and then create the JOT token I was talking about for the microgateway. The request will be redirected to the microgateway, and the microgateway then can verify that the user has the right to access the container, the service behind the microgateway. What we typically recommend is to set up the Airlock gateway in front, not too strict. So exception shouldn't be done there. Security concerns shouldn't be, or filtering concerns shouldn't be solved there, but they should be solved inside the microgateway. Which means that the roles or the tasks are, the main task is the Airlock Microgateway will secure the API, while the Airlock Gateway will publish the API, meaning it will present the API to the front, to the internet. The architecture, as I said, the reverse proxy will be the front Airlock Gateway, the container will be the one directly on the service. The authentication authorization policy enforcement point for the single sign-on will be on the Airlock Gateway, while the Airlock Microgateway will be able to verify those JOTs, those JSON Web Token, internally. So they know the signature of the Airlock IAM and will be able to verify that those JOT tokens were issued by the IAM and include the according information they need to grant the access. As I said, the Airlock Gateway should have a baseline security, so keep it simple. Be sure that you don't have to do many changes on the Airlock Gateway, that you don't have false positives on the Airlock Gateway, while the Airlock Microgateway will have the detailed service integration. And the nice thing is, since you're using containers, you can the developers will be able to deploy those containers inside the development environment. They will develop against those containers, will create the according rule set, and then give it to the main infrastructure, to the public infrastructure with their service. Okay, this is why the strict security can be done on the Airlock Microgateway, while the Airlock Gateway in the front of it should have a baseline security. The integration, generic turnkey configuration, it's more like the gateway, just moving requests around the Airlock Gateway itself, while of course the Microgateway will have a detailed service integration with all the details needed for the according service. And if you're using API keys or API usage plans, this will happen on the Airlock Gateway, because this is where the communication with the Airlock IAM is done. Before we are having a look at the configuration and the main features, I would like to show you how you can easily run such a Docker image of the Microgateway. I've set up my Docker machine to run locally. And I will compose a microgateway with an according backend. I will have a Tomcat in the background, which will be echoing the requests. I've already started this thing, so now if I send a curl request to the microgateway, sometimes it needs a few seconds, or I did something wrong. Here it is. Okay. It needed a few seconds, but it started after a while. So you saw, until it started, it wasn't possible to reach the microgateway, but now it's up. And the configuration is done using YAML or DSLs, of course. And the thing I started here, the config of this thing I started, was that simple. I had a reference to the license. I told my my container that I would like to have a mapping, which I call Tomcat, listening to everything coming from the inside, redirecting it to the test servlet path, and I told it to have the security level strict, and everything else was by default. And I had the backend connection with port 8080 called Tomcat. And inside the Docker Compose, I told it what to start, which image to take, which ports to start, where to find the configuration, the license, and on what other service to wait for. The Tomcat service down here simply started the var file where this echo server was running. And this was already enough to provide this example I had. What we included in the DSL or in the specification is the possibility to do deny rules and exceptions, upload open API specifications, as I said, validate and jot the JSON Web Token and extract authorization out of it, so you can send roles using those jots. And as I've shown you, the configuration is done with DSL, so the config YAML I showed you. And what we included additionally, instead of having to implement all those things all the time yourself, it's also possible to use mapping templates as fallback if you need to have features which we haven't implemented yet inside the YAML file. So you can take, for instance, the IAM mapping, and instead of doing the YAML yourself, you will just take the mapping and then tell the Docker or the microgateway to use this file as an image. If you want to check out what is already configured and what is not configured, you might have seen we've released also docsairlock.com, where the newest releases of our products have their online help. So the online help can be found online. You can download it in an offline version. And if you go to the microgateway help, you can open up the appendix, and down here is the DSL reference telling you what you can configure, how it's set up, and what the default value is. That's the reason why my config was so short, because many things are already in the default, and I didn't have to bother about it as long as I used the same things as in the default. Of course, if I needed to change them, I could take them. I could have a look at this reference and then adapt my config YAML file accordingly. You see on the right side there is an example. Virtual hosts, how you can set it up, how you can reference certificates. You have multiple mappings in here. You can change the threat handling, and so on and so on. You can even check the roles, as I said down here. So there are many things possible the things I chose were the simple default configuration with 1 or 2 changes. So in order to be able to have a really easy example setup. So from there on enabling the DevSecOps, we are using environment variables for the staging. So you can have the same configuration in multiple environments. There are hooks for custom scripts, so you can run your scripts before or after. We have readiness and liveness probes, so your operations can check if the according container is started up or not. The logs are written, what is typical for those environments, into the standard out in the JSON format. And of course, high availability and scaling is possible. Scaling, of course, you can start multiple container, and they can then take the requests and work with them. And the session handling can be shared across multiple containers when you also start a Redis database as a service, and all those tell those containers to connect to the Redis database. They will be able first to have the session handling, and of course, as long as they use the same Redis database, they will be able to share those sessions. And last but not least, it's available on Docker Hub. So we have a private repository. If you would like to be able to reach the according repository, you can send us a mail on order@airlock.com, and we will then add you and allow you to access the our repository, so you're able to download the newest versions of the Microgateway, and then of course link accordingly your Docker to the Docker Hub, so you can always get the newest software. As I said, you can run our Docker images, our microgateways, using or orchestrating using Kubernetes or OpenShift. For those who already worked with this, you might know that it's nice to have OpenShift and Kubernetes doing many things, taking over many responsibilities. On the other hand, it ends up in a YAML confusio, because you have a lot of files which you have to run by yourself and check and verify and add and do the changes and so on and so on. And this is why we decided to include Helm Charts. So this is a package manager for Kubernetes and OpenShift. It includes the description of applications and their dependencies, and it allows a quick and easy deployment of a microgateway. The Airlock Helm Charts can be found on GitHub. So if you click here, you will get those Helm Charts with a whole documentation. There's a quick start guide how to get those Helm Charts, and there's the configuration down here. Again, we have set up the configuration with default values, so you can have a quick start and a quick hello world. And first successes without having to define a whole own YAML gigabyte big file of YAML specifications. So there's a nice explanation down here. There is the chart YAML up here, which shows you. No, this is not what I wanted to show you. Yeah, there are the values with where you can see how everything is set up. Here you can see the replica count, how many containers should be running, what image you want to take. There's a microgateway configuration. There's a simple configuration where you can easily set up an example, like I did it with only Docker, but using the Helm. And down here, there's even more configurations. If you want to have more complicated things down here, you can then extend the configuration from simple away to the advanced. Again, using this one and using docs.airlock.com will help you get started very, very fast. I didn't mention before, in docs.airlock.com you have the Hello World example, which sets up a quick and easy win to get the first Docker image of the microgateway running, including the test. So you will see the running example is quite simple in 5 steps. And of course, if you set up Docker in front, and down here is the test deployment, where you can then test and see if the deployment was successful. The Helm charts are published with the MIT license, which means that you have a permission to use this commercially. You can do modifications, you can distribute it, you can have use it in a private use, but we don't have a liability and warranty. It's actually just meant to have a quick start for you and have a point to move on from somewhere and not start with an empty sheet. Again, as I said, the documentation can be found on the docs.airlock.com. There's also things like monitoring, how you run everything, how you deploy everything. You should find the information there, and otherwise you can open up a support case and ask us if anything shouldn't be that clear. So much about the Airlock Microgateway. I would like to have another small announcement. We're planning a guru course for those of you who passed the all-rounder and the connoisseur course. So if you have a WAF or a gateway certification, we will present a guru course in the fall of this year. We're gonna announce the date I think in a few weeks, and it will be a course about the microgateway. So a one-day course where you can get started with it. If you have if you would like to have one day just focusing on it and work with us, we will also possibly include the Helm Charts, so you will be able to orchestrate the whole thing using Helm. And last but not least, we have the webinars you just joined, and the Gateway webinar and the German versions, of course, they are on the website. You see here the screenshot was before the webinars were held. Today is the last webinar for the Gateway and Microgateway. If you missed them and want to rewatch them, or have a colleague who did miss them, you can find them on Texon Ergon CH. I think we'll publish it by tomorrow, or the latest on Monday, with the slides and the recorded webinar. So you can rewatch the things I was talking about. We have 2 webinars which are announced but not pinpointed. There is no registration yet. We're planning to release the IAM before 22nd of October. So as soon as the release announcement will go out and the release will be announced officially, we will also open up the registration for the IAM 7.3, which will be a long-time service version of the IAM, including also the API keys which are introduced with the IAM 7.2. So you can look forward to that webinar. We have a question tool, so if something shouldn't be clear or needs more specification, you can use that publicly, or there's even a private mode where you can ask just us and no one else will see the question, or you can use the chat. From my side, that's it. Thank you for joining. Yeah, I usually try to keep it under 30 minutes, 25 minutes, that's not too bad. We will stay online. I will just shut down my microphone and I will announce in the chat as soon as there are no questions that we will shut down the webinar. Thank you for joining. Have a nice day. Bye.